Hey, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Luke from Astro Awakening. It is currently Thursday, the 12th of October at 6:34 a.m. Melbourne time, Australia. I'm coming to you from sunny Melbourne. This is my little video on a little breakdown of the cosmic weather as we stand at the moment, and also a look into the eclipse that's happening in a couple of days' time. Wow, wow, wow. We have certainly had some cosmic shifts on a grand scale that have definitely released a lot of primal, animalistic, emotional energy, creating extreme polarizing events. And what I want to say from the outset is a few things. I want to be mindful and respectful of those caught up in this in any personal sort of ways. That I don't take sides in these types of divisions and conflicts and things like that. I will say that any intentional harming of innocence, whether that be man, woman, child, any intentional harming of innocence is evil. It's an evil act, regardless of who's committing it and the justification for doing it. There is no justification. There is no justification for the killing of innocence, for the harming of innocence. So that is an evil act. And in relation to what is happening at the moment, no one side is guilt-free of that. Just look at it like that. No one has any sort of clear conscience when it comes to that. And if you want to extend that out, neither does, Ukraine, Russia, neither does America, neither does the military of the world, Australia, and all sorts of places. In the name of war, in the name of peace, there's been a lot of bloodshed of innocence. And I would just say that that's evil. That's an evil thing. And that at the moment of justice and judgment, that those perpetrating those evil acts should be expecting almighty justice for sure. So the next thing is that the polarizing event. So I'm going to take a look at the astrology of around that time when this sort of broke news and what's happening. But be mindful that unless you are personally caught up in this, like really personally caught up into this, you're only basing your reaction, your judgment, your condemnation, your praise, your shock, whatever, on the information that's being provided. And the information that's being provided has to be questioned because of its validity, its accuracy. Is it free? And is it neutral? Is it an objective perspective? Is it is it exactly the account of what's happening? Or is it propaganda or propagandized? And if we've learned anything over the last, 20 years, especially since 9/11, is to the extent that the media, corporations, and governments will go to propagandize a story and narrative, to create a narrative, and the way in which that's crafted and how they do that to play into the emotions of the collective to elicit particular responses. And I've said about this recently, which it's about the Hegelian dialectic, right? Divide and conquer, which is problem, reaction, solution, right? They manufacture the problem to create the reaction. The reaction is the energetic fuel, the emotional fuel that they need to drive the solution, which is already, preconceived, right? They already have the solution. They just need your reaction, which is a consent to that solution. So when you have more awareness between the problem and the reaction, you create a gap or a space. And in that pause, you have a moment to reflect, to discern, to question, and to make a choice of how you are going to respond. The less self-aware you are, the more indoctrinated or conditioned, the more blinded you are, the more emotionally triggered you are, the problem and the reaction is going to be so so closely aligned that it's just problem and then it's just reaction, right? But if we understand that that problem is a stimulation, it's a stimulus of some type, and between the stimulus and the response, there is a gap. The more self-aware you become, the more work you do on yourself, the more depolarizing, the more balancing, the more finding your center, that bigger that gap gets. And what you'll realize in that gap is that's where you have a choice of how you will respond. And when you exercise your free will and choice in that moment, you become response able. You take response ability for your choice and how you're choosing to respond. Now, I'm not here to say how you should respond. I'm just saying realize you have a choice. If you're triggered by a stimulus and you're reacting, question the stimulus. Question that. Now, if you can't, for whatever reason, help but react a certain way, then maybe what you need to do is disconnect from the stimulus altogether and turn away from it, turn it off, go out in nature, ground, focus on the things that really matter in your world, like the things that really matter in your world. Keep it really simple, right? Find time to stop and smell the roses in your life. Give your attention to things that need it. Lend a helping hand. Bank some positive karma. Pay it forward. Just know that there is a lot of information. We live in the information age, but we also live in the age of, manipulation, right? Manipulation of information. So you have to be very, very discerning, and you have to be able to be balanced, centered into that 0 point of neutrality so you can create some objectivity and you can look at the bigger picture. When you're emotionally stimulated, especially with what we're about to look at with regards to the astrology of this event, it's triggered some very primal animalistic emotions. You're going to, find it difficult to manage the reaction, right? So if information is provided in a certain or presented in a certain way to you that is eliciting that response, it's like, now I take the belief that certain events are synchronistic or coincidental in relation to cosmic alignments, and certain events are manufactured to happen at the time of certain alignments. This is the path of adeptship, right? To become an adept is to be able to utilize cosmic energy to, channel that cosmic energy to be able to create under your will. And certain people, certain high up elites, certain people that are elevated their positions of great authority within culture and society are adepts. They know the clock, they've aligned to the clock. So if they want to create an event to elicit a reaction to get to their solution, they're not going to just do it at a certain, let's just, flip a coin. It's not going to happen. They're meticulously planning these things out. They know exactly where the alignments are going to be, because the clock is helping us understand, the macrocosm is helping us understand the microcosm, the collective energy here. So if you tune into that collective energy, then you've got a greater success rate of creating via your will through the will of the gods, so to speak. Now, that doesn't mean that the will of the gods is necessarily evil or good or whatever. It's energy. It's just how that energy is channeled and tuned in and tapped in. It's obvious to me from the research that I've done and from the studies that I've done and from the knowledge that I've acquired that, people running the world, they're adepts at this. They're masters at this. Think about, just digress for a little bit. Think about the royals, right? The royals, it's the monarch. The moon arch. The moon arch. How do you get, the royal moon arch? They're master magicians. They're occultists. They're adepts. Think of like Trump, right? Which the major arcana, which relate to pathways on the tree of life, in the Kabbalistic tree of life, which are balancing of forces. The major arcana are known as trump cards. Think about Trump. He's a master magician. Think about, make America great again. MAGA, magician, a magus, right? That's magician. That's magicians. Magicians run the world. And if you're a magician and you're an adept magician, you're paying very particular attention to the cosmic clock. That's the truth, the way. That's the light that shines for all. We're kept in the dark from that. No, we can't access that knowledge unless we knock on the door. It's not, don't cast those pearls before the swine. But let me tell you, when you study that, when you study symbology, when you study the occult, you understand it's a language of symbolism. And then you see it symbolically used, and not only in these types of events, but also through corporate logos, logos, the word, right? They put millions of dollars into the research and development and to the continual process of evolution of their symbols and logos. So COVID is a classic example of how they tuned into the cosmic clock to initiate a pandemic, right? You had the Saturn, the old god, the ruler of Capricorn, the goat god, right? Well, the old times that was Pan. He was known as the god Pan. That's where we get the word panic, pandemic, pandemonium. So Saturn in Capricorn conjunct Pluto in Capricorn. Of course, the clock said, hey, it's time for a pandemic. Well, it didn't say that, but that's what the magicians that run the world went, boom, we can do this. Because they're creating under their own will using the cosmic clock. So just bear that in mind. There's no coincidence. Certain events are random and there's certain events that, but these types of things, this is the system. People that run the system, they're master magicians. You got to wise up to that. Because the only way to break their spells is to become aware of their spells. It's the magician pulling the rabbit out of the hat. Once you know how he does it, it doesn't work anymore. You're no longer like, oh, there's no response anymore. It's like, do it again. And I will say that nature magic, earth magic, that the keepers of wisdom, known as the indigenous cultures, North America, South America, Australia and other places like that around the world, the wisdom keepers of the nature magic trumps. That's the highest form of magic. It trumps all low magic. It trumps all low magic. And what they're doing, these master occultists, these master magicians that run the world, or they run the system, right? They're using magic. Another little thing before we get to the charts. I'm trying to keep this video short. You know what I mean? Is that we're at the end of the world. We are at the end of the world. Now, for some people, that might elicit a response like, you mean the world's going to end? Yeah, the world is going to end because substitute world for age. World, age, same thing. We're at the end of an age. And when we're at the end of the age, all of the symbolism, all of the systems of control based on that symbolism must come down so that the new age can emerge. We're living in the time of the transition of the ages. I mean, when you look at the cosmic clock, there is conjecture and there is, debate in relation to when, and the symbolism doesn't lie. Look around the world. What the hell is going on? So I'll be talking more about this in my live talk I'm going to be doing on Saturday at my live event called Cosmic Vibe. So I'm going to be in Melbourne doing a live event. It's a sold out event. I've got 45 people board. It's a small little intimate venue. And once I've done that live talk, then I will do a YouTube update. I might even try and video the event, maybe. I'll see. I'm not sure. I haven't really thought that far ahead, but I'll be talking about the ages and why I feel that we're at the end of the age, but we're at the end of the world, the end of the age. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. Why? Because it's time to bring all that down. And what I want to do right at the end of this video, so we're going to look at the astrology of the recent event. We're going to look at the eclipse, and then we're going to look at, really briefly, iPet Goat 2, because it's a beautiful symbolic animation. If you haven't already watched iPet Goat 2, I recommend you go and watch iPet Goat 2. Type it into YouTube, iPet Goat. So I-P-E-T, goat, and then 2. You know, that came out about 10 years ago now. And there's a lot of symbolism in that in relation to events that continue to occur as well, or that have occurred, or they're going to. Was it foreshadowing the future? Is it just symbolic? There's so much symbolism. It's so rich in symbolism. It's hard to think that that's in some way sort of foreshadowing future rather than just foretelling past. But anyway, we'll have a brief look at that. And I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to play that video on here, so I'm going to take some screenshots of certain points along that video, but I recommend that you go and watch it, excuse me, after this. I'll put the link to it in the description below. So this is the chart for around the time of the recent event that happened. And there's a lot going on in here, and I'm going to unpack that for you. So the main thing I want to look at is this Pluto down here. Pluto is at 27 degrees of Capricorn, and it's stationing. When a planet is stationing, it sits at a particular zodiacal degree, and it doesn't move forward or backwards. So it tends to amplify or intensify the significations of the energy of that particular planetary body. Pluto, the god of the underworld, so deals with transformation through crisis or through intense emotional experiences. And what Pluto will do is it will bring from the unconscious into the consciousness primal animalistic drives, right? The real soul energy that comes through. And it'll also release a lot of repressed energy. And especially because Pluto's the co-ruler of Scorpio, repressed emotional energy, often it's conflict and anger. Now, Pluto's stationing direct. Actually, at the time of this video, it's just stationed to go direct. Now, that's not a huge necessary cosmic event, because Pluto's such a slow-moving planet that when it slows down and stops and then moves forward, it doesn't really, you know, have huge impact unless it's triggered, unless it's activated by other planetary alignments or by its alignment within your natal chart. So in other words, if Pluto's stationing direct on a particular natal planet for you, you might be feeling an intense amount of emotions coming up and welling up. You might have experiences of a crisis going on, or existential crises, or you might be dealing with things that you've decided for a period of time to not deal with. And all of a sudden now you're dealing with that. You can't hide from Pluto. Eventually, the unconscious will become conscious. The purge, right? It's a purging of that stored energy, because Pluto is a transformational planet. And if it doesn't purge out that energy, what happens is there's no transformation, there's stagnation. And stagnation leads to atrophy, and atrophy leads to death. So Pluto is the god of death, but also rebirth. It's almost like you have to die to be reborn. And each time, if you're able to do that and go through that process, you generally are reborn on a higher level of vibrational frequency. Sometimes those experiences can last quite a period of time. You can feel like you're in the dark night of the soul, or trudging through the swamp for a long period, because Pluto transits slowly. So, you know, an aspect to your natal chart from Pluto can sometimes last for 3 years, and you might have 5 to 6 different hits throughout that period of time. But you can bet that what happens through that period is irrevocable transformation. It's the change that needs to happen. So it was interesting that around this recent blow-up event, Pluto was stationing. Now, it was activated by the god of war, Mars. Now, a couple of videos ago, I mentioned to say, keep your eye on Mars, because Mars rules the North Node Aries. Aries is the god of war, Mars the god of war, right? Aries energy, if you look in the mythology for Aries, Mars energy, it's always war, right? It's conflict, it's motivation, it's aggression. Now that's dynamic energy, that's motivation, that's assertion, that's power, that's will, right? So it can be channeled, and it's extreme. Like, you want to get shit done, you need a bit of Mars energy. But, you know, when it's taken to an extreme, it can be just like pulling the sword and everything, you know, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail sort of thing. So where was Mars? Mars was debilitated, right? So opposite the sign it rules, debilitated. When a planet's debilitated, you often get more of its dysfunctional aspects. You know, it's unbalanced force, usually. Not always, but quite often. I have Mars natally in Libra, and I can understand that I'm always putting everyone else first, doing everything right to my own detriment, to the point of what? I can blow up and I get fucking frustrated and pissed off. So Mars squaring Pluto at this time. And it's like, boom. Now, Mars ruling over the North Node. If you look on the North Node, you have this little anchor here next to the North Node. We're pretty much in an exact conjunction, like 10 minutes off an exact conjunction, which 10 minutes is less than a degree. It's fucking close. So Eris, this is Eris. Eris is the goddess of discord and chaos. The North Node is the types of events that are going to propel transformation and alignment to fate, almost destiny, almost the future, almost how things are playing out and how we're moving forward. We're learning how to become more Aryan, we're more assertive, more courageous, more direct, more decisive, more confident, more initiating, more taking action. So through what? Through chaos. Now, the interesting little side note, and this is I won't show you this. Actually, I will show you a picture up here, is there is some mythology around Eris. I encourage you to look it up. But in relation to Eris and the apple of discord that she rolled at the feet of the three women, the Alice character that's sort of sitting there holding the apple, and the apple rolls out and rolls over, and it lands on this little marker on the floor, and it's a little, it looks like less, you know, the less than sign. And then the C and the apple becomes the 0, and then it splits into 2, which is CO2. So, and there's a foot there, and it's like it's a businessman's shoe almost. And I look at that as the less than CO2 is the globalists, you know, like less CO2, we got a less CO2 there in the climate change working. We do less CO2. And the apple of discord rolls at the feet and splits in 2, and out comes the lotus. So it's like through chaos, you know, it's like their modus operandum is order out of chaos. You know, that's one of the Freemasonic sort of axioms, is order out of chaos. So on this particular here, so we have this as Eris here, right? In Aries, which is the god of war, we have Eris, right? Activated by Mars squaring Pluto. Why is Mars activating? Because Mars rules over this Aries energy. So Mars hits this Pluto, the god of the underworld, transformation through crisis. Mars is the god of war, and Mars rules over the North Node and the Eris conjunction. So like, okay, forward now is we go through this apple of discord, Eris energy, which is to create fucking chaos, discordian energy, right? Now, the other final thing about this alignment here that was going on is the moon. And the moon around this time in the home sign, emotional sign of Cancer, and it squares Mars and opposes Pluto, right? And squares creates this big grand cross, you know, in the sky. The moon's interesting for events. If you look at every major worldwide event that sort of affects the collective, whether it's a man-made or whether it's a natural disaster, you'll always see the moon prominently placed either in, you know, like a square to the sun, so like a quarter phase or a full moon phase. Like the moon has a lot of significance, and I found it very interesting that, you know, bringing this through into your emotions. So we've got this moon Pluto opposition. We're dealing with intense, emotional, and the moon also is our innate reactiveness. So Pluto is the repressed stuff, but the moon is our emotional response, how we emotionally respond. So your moon and your natal chart can tell you a lot about the ways in which you respond to things. I'm lucky and fortunate. I have a moon in Taurus. Now, lucky and fortunate in the sense that I can, most big things, I'm pretty cool, calm, and collected. You know, if you want to look at your moon in your natal chart, look to the element and where is it in. Is it a watery moon? Is it a fiery moon? Is it an airy moon? Are you more of an intellector? It's a talker? Do you like talking about your emotions? Are you a grounded person? You've got an earthy moon. Yeah, just look at the element of your moon, and maybe even then from there the cardinal, fixed, or mutable modality of that moon as well can help you understand a lot about the way you emotionally respond. Point being here is the moon is, you know, powerful moon in Cancer, the emotions, cardinal. There's an emotional what? There's an emotional projection. Look what happened at the as the response or the reaction to this problem that was, you know, manifested at this particular alignment. And we have a look over the Middle East. Boom, we've got some huge, intense, aggressive, polarizing anger, emotional reaction, despair, helplessness, right? Outcry, condemnation, all of it, all of it. It's just like, whoa, it's fully going on. Now, the other thing I haven't mentioned here is that in regards to Pluto is Pluto will often polarize into extremes, right? So when Pluto energy manifests through the collective, it often manifests into these extremes. You get this extreme polarization. If you think about COVID and what COVID was, right, was this pandemic. But what did it do? It divided people, families, you know, towns, cities, communities, countries. It divided them. It divided them into those that were driven by fear and their conditioning and their programming and triggered to respond to like lockdown, mask up, jab up, to those that were like, what the fuck? No way. But just no, hang on, more measured. So it's really polarized these two polarities. How do I know we're at the end of a world age? Because there's so much polarity and polarization and extremes. We've got extremes that have found their way into the system. If you look in the system at the moment, the system is the banking system, the education system, the medical system, all of the governmental systems, all of those systems, we've got extremes. We don't have middle ground. We don't have that. We have these real ideological ends of the extremes. You just look at the gender stuff that's going on in relation to pronouns, and you know, and it's like, whoa. And then you've got the other end, and it's this extreme sort of Nazi far right energy. It's like there's a lot of extremes going on. So we're definitely purging out the extremes so that the balance point can be found. And that's often the hallmark of this Plutonic energy, is to polarize into these extremes. So huge polarization in relation to, you know, what's gone on over the last few days. Now, I would like to say that we're going to get a break from this, but we're probably not going to get a break because we're moving into an eclipse. So this is coming off the back of, or just before, prior to an eclipse that's coming up. The last thing I'll really say about this is the Uranus energy. If you go back to my last two videos, I've mentioned about Uranus being in alignment to pretty much every new moon for the next 6 to 8 months. When you have a new moon, it's like a start point, energetic sort of pump, right? It's like this pump, this cosmic pump, this pumping. So when the seed is planted for that expression of month ahead, that's the new moon energy. Whatever planetary alignments are activating that lunation are going to sort of somehow be embedded into the expression of that energy as we move forward through the month. They'll reach their peak at the full moon, and then they'll wane as we move to the next new moon. Well, Uranus is the planet of upheaval, of chaos, of change, of unpredictability, of sudden things, of flashes of insight, awareness, of awakening of consciousness, of moving to higher levels of consciousness into the higher mind from the lower mind. So this can be confronting, especially if you're stuck and limited and restricted into complacency or stagnation or just fear. That Uranus comes again as a transformational energy because we need to grow, to evolve, to change. And sometimes that change is something happening. Sometimes it's a death that needs to occur. Sometimes it's an ending of something. Sometimes it's some sort of cosmic, energetic sort of catastrophe that has to happen, because that's the liberation. Hello, Uranus, the liberator, the liberation of that energy to create the change, right? So we have to be comfortable with change. And there's going to be an escalation of change in the unpredictable nature. When change in the unpredictable nature comes through, right, it's about learning the lesson of flexibility, have a plan, but be open to change, and find your balance point, and be always constantly coming back to that neutrality, that balance, that 0 point, so that as chaos happens on the polarities and the ends and things are in upheaval, you can navigate through. Or it might cause for pause, where you can just sit and you can allow the chaos to happen around you. And it's almost like the Zen-like Buddha sitting in amongst the tornado. It's like, okay, I'm in the eye. I am the eye. So find your center point to navigate these shifts. So I'm recording this video in 2 sections. I got up this morning early and did the first part, and now I'm just going to record the second part. Obviously, it'll be seamless for you guys because I'll edit them together. That's why my attire has changed, and it's Melbourne, and you know, every hour the weather changes. So we're going to look at the eclipse energy at the moment for the solar eclipse that's happening on the 14th of October, which is this coming Saturday, 6:55 p.m. And that's GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. I've set this chart for. So for us in Australia, the eclipse is actually going to occur in the wee hours of Sunday morning, but check your local time to discover when the eclipse is. Before we go right into the specifics of this eclipse, there's a couple of things I want to address at the beginning. Eclipses are wild cards. They can sometimes bring in the energy of chaotic change. Chaotic change can be quite confronting because it's like, oh my God, chaos. Chaotic is meaning unpredictable nature. Chaotic is unpredictable. So chaotic change is the unpredictable change. And because these eclipses occur when we have a sun moon conjunction or opposition, in other words, a new moon, full moon, on the nodal axis, the node being the dragon's tail, the dragon's head, Rahu and Ketu, the south node and the north node. They are very karmic points within the sphere of astrology, and they relate to the path of the sun and moon and where they cross each other, or where the moon crosses the ecliptic, the path of the sun that takes through the zodiac, and it creates these nodes, or another word to think of it is knots. Creates these knots, and that can be what happens during an eclipse. Is it's the either tying up or undoing of a knot of energy. So it can be a real karmic release, fated, almost like we're being addressed to release something, to let it go, to overcome it, to confront it, or to move towards it, to evoke the change, the growth, the opportunities for soul expansion. Now, eclipses come in what's called Saros Series, and that means that we have an eclipse happening every 18 years within a series of eclipses that span over a 1,300-year period. So when you look at the initiating eclipse for that series, every 18 years there's going to be an eclipse. There's about 70 odd eclipses during that cycle of a 1,300-year period. So to get a bit of an understanding or a theme or flavor of each particular unique eclipse within that series, you can look at the initial eclipse, the alignments that were significant, and you can understand a little bit of the flavor associated to the eclipse. So when we did this one, this is part of Saros Series South 7. And the first eclipse of this series was on the South Pole. Obviously, that's why it's a South Series. And it was in June of 1248. And the final eclipse is going to be obviously on the North Pole, and that's going to be in July of 2492. So a 1,300-year period, give or take. And if we imagine that the beginning and the end are like the bell curve, with this particular eclipse, Saros Series South 7, that began in 1248. So this is 1248 over here, and this is 2492 over here. This being the middle point, we're about here in this eclipse series. So we're just past the peak of, the peak was around the late 1800s when this series peaked. Now, just like this energy or this bell curve shows, is that when we have eclipses around this middle point of the 12 or 1,300 year series, we have pretty powerful eclipses within that series. So just to let you know that this is going to be a pretty potent and powerful eclipse. And specifically for you at home playing along, you want to look to your chart. You want to firstly look to your Libra Aries houses, because the eclipse is straddling those houses. So the themes associated with that, if this was your chart, the 6th house, we've got work, service, health, routine, refinement. What do we do? How do we spend our time? How do we act of service? How do we give? How do we work? The type of work we do, who we work with, the way in which we work, our routine that we keep, the things we do that make us who we are, and our sort of house of personal refinement, strong connection to health and well-being, the 6th house. If this was the 12th house, that's the house of transcendence, of dreams, of isolation, of hidden enemies. So in other words, what you want to do to get a personal understanding of the eclipse is to look to the house that the nodes are straddling. So at the moment, the south node is Libra. So you check your Libra house, north node Aries, check your Aries house. Having said that, the theme of Aries Libra is always self and other. Aries is the self, the me, the I, and the I'm the center, I'm the beginning, I am the am. And then Libra is other, collaborative, perspective shift. Put your point of view in the perspective of another. Dealing with self and other, it's dealing with relationship polarity in particular. So a lot of themes for people coming up around their relationships. And then what you want to do is you want to look to the degrees activated within this eclipse. So 21 degrees of Libra is where the conjunction is happening between the sun and moon. You've also got the nodal axis at 24 degrees, and then you can check their planetary energies. So Pluto, 27 degrees, anything cardinal in 27 degrees at the moment, you're getting a bit of a workout because Pluto's just stationed direct. So that's how to understand personally what you could expect, but also with an eclipse, you've got to realize to expect the unexpected because they bring chaotic change. Now, sometimes chaotic change is fantastic. Sometimes chaotic change is fucking detrimental. And other times there can be no signification whatsoever. It's like, it's not activating your area, your geographic area or natal chart. So it can be for like, oh, that wasn't significant for me. I feel with this eclipse though, with, the different planetary energies that are really active at this time and have been over the last few days, it's probably going to be a pretty significant eclipse. Now, if we go to the original eclipse in this series in 1248, June of 1248, and we have a look at it, one of the best sources of information on eclipses that I've found is Bernadette Brady's book, The Eagle and the Lark, which is predictive astrology. So I'm just going to read a little passage here, what she says in relation to this eclipse series. The aspects of this original eclipse series was Pluto trines the eclipse. So it's interesting that we've got this Pluto energy is stationing at the moment, and this eclipse series has really got Plutonic energy. So Pluto trining the eclipse bringing chaotic change. Trines tend to bring a free flow of energy between the planets in trine because they are the same element. And then you have Plutonic energy, which is transformation through crisis. It's upheaval. It's the unconscious becoming conscious. So Pluto trine the eclipse and Mars forms a square to Pluto. So at the time of this original eclipse in 1248, which shapes the theme of the whole series every 18 years, you had Mars square Pluto, which is Mars is square Pluto at the moment. And it's just been through this peak square. We have the whole, kerfuffle that's going on. Kerfuffle. I haven't used that word in a while. Kerfuffle. I challenge you to use kerfuffle once in today. Kerfuffle. Tickle your ass with a feather. Particularly nasty weather. Just drop it in conversation, see if people are like, what the fuck did you say? This eclipse series has Mars square Pluto, this dynamic aspect, this tense Mars energy. Now, this is what Bernadette Brady writes about this particular eclipse series. The immense power, anger, and force of the Mars square Pluto is channeled into this family of eclipses via the trine. Remember that trine? So the Mars square Pluto channels that energy into this eclipse. The individual experiencing this series will find that huge obstacles will suddenly and easily clear, or, because we're dealing with polarities and chaos, on the negative side, a pending potential crisis will suddenly manifest and move through his or her life very rapidly. Either way, the individual will feel that everything is moving at great speed. That's pretty significant. That is pretty significant for what's happening in the world at the moment. So eclipses bring change. We've had the Pluto, Mars square Pluto energy, that T square, that sort of grand cross with the moon activation. We've had this polarizing event kick off. We've got a lot of shifting energy. On this particular eclipse, we also have Mars moved into domicile, into Scorpio, ruling the North Node, making a trine to Saturn. Remember, trines are a free flow of energy. Now, on the positive side, Mars is might and power. Mars is motivation. Mars is courage. It's action. It's decisiveness. Think of it in Aries. It's pure martial force. It's just reactive. In the fixed side of Scorpio, it's more calculating. It's more of like the surgeon with the scalpel knife making the clean cut or the incision. So you've got this sort of force and power of Mars in domicile, trining Saturn, ruling over that North Node. I feel like we're going to see some pretty swift, powerful military action, right? Some real structural shifts and changes within the military, within conflict in general. Remember, we've still got Eris on the North Node for this eclipse as well. So very interesting to sort of look at that in relation to what's going on. And then you bring back to what I was saying before about the world's being run by magicians. Of course, this is where we find ourselves. The other thing to note is that Venus in her fall in Virgo, right, becoming at the service of love, right? So Virgo is very service orientated, very decisive, discerning, very critical, very exacting, sort of methodical, step-by-step, processing everything, analyzing everything. And Venus is obviously what we value, what we love, and what we like. So it's almost like fall into the service of love in your life, or your value system come into alignment to your value system. And she's ruling over the Libran energy, mutual reception with Mercury, and Mercury is directly opposite Chiron. So I would expect with this, there's going to be some stories, some information at least coming to light that's sort of polarizing in the sense of creating potential pain, but also the ability to healing. And love really is going to shine the way through there. So to navigate the upheaval, to navigate the difficulty, the hurt, the pain, to, forgive, to apologize, to move forward and move through this, because this could be a great catalyst for change within your relationship dynamics, to bury the hatchet, overcome, make the changes that you need to make to clear the level playing field and move beyond any upheaval, imbalance, or conflict that may be created in the relationship. It is in conjunct Uranus. So the eclipse is at 21 degrees of Libra. Uranus is at 22 degrees. So there is an applying in conjunct, or excuse me, better way to phrase that is there is applying quincunx. Now, Uranus deals in sudden change, upheaval, freedom, liberation, chaos, right? Awakening, breakthrough. It's sort of like comes in to shift the stagnant and stuck energy. You could think of a quincunx. I like to think of a quincunx operating a lot like Uranus energy. So there's change, and there's also often separation that happens. There's just a pulling apart of those two particular energies. So that's interesting, tied into this eclipse. If you've got planets 22, 21 degrees of any particular sign, you're going to get an activation with this particular eclipse. And then following that, planets, 0, 1 degrees of any particular sign with that Mars trine Saturn, and then 27, 26, 25 degrees with the Pluto in sextile slightly to Neptune as well. So what I want to also address here is with this Plutonic energy, which is causing a lot of deeper emotional energy that's not being processed to come to the surface. Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn. Saturn, and it's stationed degree now, 0 degrees of Pisces, the final sign of the zodiac. We're dealing in the mutable water zone. We're dealing with despair and helplessness. We're dealing with victimization. We're dealing with, the extremes with Pisces energy, the emotional extremes, the depths and the highs, the lows, and all of those. So really, you're going to have to be staying really grounded. Now, I had a conversation with a friend this morning about processing emotions. And there's an opportunity, especially now moving into this eclipse, to do some deep, heavy emotional processing. It's not the emotion that you're worried about, it's the fear of feeling the emotion. You have to overcome the fear to feel the despair, the helplessness, the unworthiness, the unlove, the regret, the shame, the guilt, the remorse, the heaviness that you repress and hide from. You have to surrender to that. You have to confront the fear of it and allow it to process through you and move through you. That can be extremely overwhelming. For a lot of people, this overwhelm may cause the, complete destruction of the self, the id, the I, the identity, that go into the existential crisis of who am I don't know anymore. If you're on the brink of a big emotional sort of release, or you're finding it difficult in this time, reach out. There's a storm here. There is the ocean, the storm in the sea. I'm always reminded of what we're taught when we are taught about surf. When you live in Queensland and grow up by the beach that has waves, you're taught not to panic when you get swept off your feet, when you get overwhelmed by a wave, when you catch a gob of water. We're taught not to panic. We're taught to just stay calm, float on the back, and raise your hand. Now, that's the signal anywhere in the surf, if you see a hand go up, that someone's in difficulty. And whether it be a lifeguard or someone walking by, I guarantee that they're going to notice that and they're going to say, there's distress. So in this particular time that we find ourselves, if you're unbalanced, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling like you're taking in too much water, then put your hand up, reach out, ask for help. There is courage in vulnerability. And, now is not the time to try and brave it or to avoid it. Now is the time to surrender to it, to process it, to purge it. It's a great collective purge, and it's quite necessary. It's coming through chaos and discord to create the lotus that can rise from the mud. Okay, which now brings me to the final part of this video, which is regarding the iPet Goat 2 little animated film. I want you to sort of obviously watch the whole clip. It's actually useful to put it into half speed. So watch it right through and then watch it again, go into the settings on YouTube and put it into 0.5 actual time so you can watch it at half the speed, because you get to see a lot of the symbology a lot clearer. And in particular, pay attention from when Alice drops the apple, it rolls over to the globalist's foot. And around the 2 minutes 20 mark, you'll see Muslims praying with the whole sort of, or a Muslim character at least, praying with a whole army behind him. Looks like he's got the CIA insignia on his pocket. We move into a shot of the oil fields with oil just sort of looks like it's dripping or running dry, perhaps. After that, you'll see the Statue of Liberty with the Star of David underneath it, which is a very interesting symbolism in relation to Israel and the USA. And then you move up to this sort of, Statue of Liberty holding this torch, and within the torch is basically an embryo. And then the embryo breaks and it's a little child. And then there's this sort of, what I like to call the script writers, they're the people that control the narrative. We could call them the mainstream media, or the mainstream narrative at least is infected. The kid's head's cracked open like a yolk. It's running all over him. And then you see a reflection in this child's eyes and it says, markets plunge and then war. And after the markets plunge war, we go to a scene where there is 3 jets, look like bombers, but if you look closely, they actually look like a square from the square and compass. We know where we've seen that before. And then there's a bomb that's dropped on a mosque. And after that, right, it sort of moves on, and there is the woman holding the child. Within the background, you can see a big mushroom cloud going off. And really, from that moment forward, everything continues to break down. Even we get to a point where it looks like the Catholic Church is breaking down and this Jesus character is moving through, and we get then to the looks like what I would call the Golden Dawn, awakening of a new age, pulses coming off the radiation of the sun, and even bringing down the pyramids at the end. So the interesting thing about the I Pet Goat little short film is the apple of discord rolling to the foot of the globalist. And we've just had this Eris activation, which Eris mythology has the apple, the golden apple of discord, known as the god of chaos. And she's riding the dragon's head at the moment. And there's been a lot of activations, and there's going to continue to be a lot of activations. In particular, the next new moon has the Sun Mars conjunction in direct opposition to Uranus. So I don't see there's going to be a de-escalation. It's going to continue to escalate. Now, this video isn't to alarm you. This is to warn you. This is to become, so you become aware, so that you can rise above, transcend the chaos, to overcome the chaos, to be that center point where everything's calm and it can be going on around you, and you have no horses in that race. You know, it's time to cut the reins of those horses and let them go wild, but step off the saddle. Don't ride this. This is an energy extraction matrix. Your emotional energy is what fuels this beast. Stop giving this beast your fuel. Stop giving it your power. Stop empowering the beast system. Observation without emotional reaction. Now, whether you're in despair and helplessness and you're polarized into it, should or shouldn't, anti-pro, doesn't, or whether you're over here and you're actually resisting it and you're angry about what's happening, you know, and how could they do it? This game they've been playing, the Game of Thrones, they've been playing this for 20,000 years, maybe even more. So we're just waking up to it because we're coming into the age of awakening, right? The people are awakening to it. You have the power. You have the power to choose, right? In that, between the stimulus and the response, you have the choice. It's time to exercise that choice, become responsible, take responsibility. It doesn't mean that we are consenting to it. In fact, we can be just completely, no, we don't choose that. I don't choose the pre-programmed response that I'm supposed to have when I'm shown what I'm shown, when I see what I see, when I feel what I feel, even though energetically I feel the collective energy. I mean, if you've done any work on yourself and you're elevating your level of consciousness and your awareness, you're becoming more awakened, you're going to feel the heaviness. It's no escaping it. So you've got to be anchored and stay grounded. You've got to be able to weather these storms and get through it. You've got to realize what's breaking down, these ideologies, these polarizations, the system, the dependency upon it. How do you end a system? You eliminate dependency upon it. Not your game to play. Don't give the beast any more of your power. And your emotional potency, your reaction, your emotional energy is the most valuable source of power that they have to create their reality. So, you know, all they've got to do is present a story, present information, present it in a certain way to get that fuel that they want. Because that fuel, what does it do? It creates. That creates what? Creates their reality. They're master magicians. They're master magicians. The only way you can break the spell is you got to learn their ways. You got to see the symbols. You got to look at it differently. You got to look at it from symbology. You can't look at it rationally and reasonably. You've got to symbolically look at what's happening and what's it triggering. What response are you supposed to have or not supposed to have, and who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? Division, continuous polarity, divide, conquer, divide, conquer, divide, conquer. The modus operandum, continual process. But the more that individually you exercise your unique sovereign power to say, no, I don't partake in that. Divisiveness, that emotional reactiveness, you know, I don't partake in that. You know, stay in your own lane, disconnect to reconnect. If you want to solidify a personal practice now, a spiritual practice, you should be reinforcing some particular spiritual practice that's important for you, that helps you stay grounded, aligned, and centered. At bare minimum, 10 minutes meditation every day. If you're having difficulty finding what meditation works for you, explore, ask around, do some guided stuff. Say, hey, what are you doing? What works? Get some coaching. Just set aside 10 minutes a day for disconnection. Turn off the apps, turn off the social media, turn off the music, the news, turn off the socializer, turn off the family, turn off everything. Go somewhere into quiet, into silence. Darken the room, turn it all off, and just sit in pitch black silence. Find a spot in nature, get into the ocean, go for a walk in the bush. This is how you come back into your sovereign power and reclaim your energetic, fuel, and you create your life in your way, regardless of what's happening. That's my video. Hope you've enjoyed it. As always, I'm always available for professional guidance, spiritual support, birth chart readings, past life regressions. I've done a few dozen in the last month. 3 in particular we had questions revolving around the next 12 months, and the 3 different people with different perspectives and everything. One one was in person, 2 were online. They all had the same visions. Lots of explosions, lots of panic, lots of upheaval, but not necessarily impacting anyone personally. Like they were like, it's happening, but it's not happening to me or for me or close by. It's just, you can see it happening. So 3 different people I regressed had that same experience in relation to when the timeline was the next 6 to 8 months. Sort of fits in with the astrology and this Uranus chaotic upheaval, liberation, awakening. Just think about it like this. Is everything like this is a potential opportunity for a process of awakening, to step back, to question, to pause, to choose, to exercise your sovereignty, your authority, be the author of your life, your story, not theirs. I'm Luke Belk from Astro Awakening. As always, peace out.